The wooden benches of the federal bankruptcy court felt hard and unforgiving beneath me as I watched the woman who married my father dab her eyes with a crumpled tissue. Victoria stood before the federal trustee, wearing a faded gray sweater she likely pulled from a donation bin that very morning. It was a calculated wardrobe choice, designed to hide the $12,000 diamond Rolex I knew she kept locked in her vanity. She wept openly, performing the role of a destitute widow left with nothing but medical debt and despair. She played the broken victim flawlessly, just as she had 2 months ago on the afternoon we buried my father. Before the dirt on his casket had even settled, she had the deadbolts on my childhood home swapped and my belongings shoved into garbage bags on the wet driveway. When I stood on the porch and asked for an explanation, she did not yell or argue. She simply smiled a thin, tight smile and handed me a stack of unopened mail. Inside were 5 different credit card statements totaling $45,000 in luxury purchases, designer handbags, vacations, and high-end spa treatments. All of them charged to accounts she had secretly opened using my social security number. She expected me to shoulder the financial ruin of her extravagant lifestyle, while she filed for Chapter 7 relief to wipe her own slate clean, leaving me to drown in collections calls and ruin credit. What she did not know was that my right hand rested quietly inside my coat pocket, tracing the cold, jagged edges of a small brass key. My father had spent the last 2 years of his life quietly observing his wife and her endless greed. He knew his health was failing, and he knew exactly what she would attempt the moment his heart stopped beating. So he went to a trusted estate attorney and established an ironclad, irrevocable trust worth $1.5 million, naming me as the sole beneficiary. He funded it, slowly siphoning money out of his own business before Victoria could drain the main accounts. He left the trust documents and that safe deposit box key hidden where only I would find them, along with a private forensic audit detailing every single dollar she had embezzled into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands over the past 5 years. By standing under oath in that quiet federal courtroom and swearing to the government that she had 0 hidden assets, she was no longer just a greedy stepmother trying to ruin my life. She had willingly walked into a trap of federal perjury and bankruptcy fraud, and I was sitting in the back row, waiting for the perfect moment to hand the judge the very receipts that would put her in a federal prison. My name is Olivia. I am 28 years old, a clinical pharmacist, and I had just buried the father who taught me how to fight in silence. Before I continue this story, I want you to drop a comment below telling me your age and where you are watching from today. Hit the like button and subscribe to Sweet Life Drama if you have ever watched a toxic family member play the victim to manipulate everyone around them. Trust me, you will want to hear exactly how I let this woman dig her own grave in front of the United States government, and how I made sure she lost every single thing she stole. The memorial dinner took place exactly 7 days after the funeral. Victoria chose a private dining room at the Oak Room, a steakhouse known for its 4-figure wine bottles and dim lighting. She sent the invitations through a group text, claiming she wanted a quiet, safe space for the family to heal. She arrived wearing the same faded gray sweater she would later wear to the bankruptcy court, but her makeup was flawless. Chloe, my older sister, sat next to her, dabbing her eyes with a linen napkin. Chloe inherited my father's trusting nature. She absorbed every word Victoria said like a sponge, soaking up a spill. Across the table, Victoria pushed a half-eaten piece of sea bass around her porcelain plate and sighed. The performance began. She told my aunts and uncles that my father died drowning in hidden medical bills. She claimed he took out a second mortgage without her knowledge to cover failed business investments. She manufactured a story about receiving foreclosure notices in the mail just yesterday, detailing how the bank was threatening to seize the house before the end of the month. Her voice trembled at the perfect moments. She paused to sip her sparkling water, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. I sat across from her, cutting my steak in slow, methodical motions. Next to Chloe sat Marcus, her husband. Marcus is a senior forensic auditor for a corporate accounting firm. He spends his days dismantling corporate tax evasion schemes and tracking hidden offshore accounts. He is a man who reads ledgers the way other people read novels. He did not say a word during Victoria's speech. He just watched her. He watched the way her eyes darted to gauge the room's reaction. He noted the steady rhythm of her breathing, contradicting the fake tears. And then his gaze dropped to her left wrist. Victoria reached for her water glass, and her sweater sleeve rode up just an inch. The dining room chandelier caught the light. A Rolex Datejust, diamond dial 18-karat yellow gold fluted bezel. A $12,000 timepiece without a single scratch on the clasp. It was pristine, fresh out of the display case. A woman facing imminent foreclosure does not buy a diamond Rolex. Marcus lowered his fork. Our eyes met across the table for a fraction of a second. He gave a microscopic tilt of his chin toward her wrist. He knew. I held his gaze and blinked once. A silent pact forged over a medium-rare ribeye. The waiter approached the table with a black leather check presenter. The bill for 15 people at the Oak Room easily surpassed $2,000. Victoria reached into her designer purse with a heavy theatrical sigh. She pulled out a sleek metal credit card and handed it to the waiter. She looked around the table, offering a tragic, brave smile. She told everyone she was putting the last of her savings on the line to honor my father's memory. Aunt Sarah reached over and squeezed Victoria's shoulder, whispering words of comfort. 2 minutes later, the waiter returned the card. Victoria slipped it back into her purse. My phone rested face down on the table, next to my water glass. The screen lit up. A push notification from a banking app I had downloaded 3 days prior after checking my credit score. The notification read, "Card not present. Transaction approved. $2,480 at the Oak Room." The card she just handed the waiter had my name on it. She was paying for her own pity party using my stolen Social Security number right in front of my face. My heart beat against my ribs like a hammer striking an oak door. I kept my hands flat on the tablecloth. I focused on the condensation dripping down my glass. I traced the water droplet with my index finger. If I stood up and shouted, if I flipped the table and exposed her right there, I would lose the advantage. I would be the hysterical, grieving daughter lashing out at a struggling widow. Victoria would twist it. She would play the victim. I needed her to keep feeling invincible. I needed her to keep spending and building the paper trail of her own fraud. Victoria folded her napkin and cleared her throat. The table quieted down. She turned her body directly toward me. She used a tone dripping with manufactured maternal concern. "Olivia," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "You have such a good job at the hospital. Your father was so proud of your pharmacist's salary. I need you to step up now. The debts he left behind are burying me. It is time for you to take responsibility for your family." Aunt Sarah murmured her agreement. Uncle David crossed his arms and stared at me. The rest of the relatives shifted in their seats, casting expectant glances my way. They looked at me, waiting for me to pull out my checkbook and surrender. They wanted me to fund the lifestyle Victoria was accustomed to living. I looked at Victoria. I studied the fake sorrow in her eyes, the perfect posture, the calculated tilt of her head. I slid my right hand into my coat pocket. My fingertips found the brass key my father left me. The cold, jagged metal grounded me. I traced the numbers engraved on the top. 402, the vault. I smiled. It was a thin, controlled smile. I nodded slowly. "You are right, Victoria," I said, keeping my voice soft and even. "We all need to take responsibility for our actions. I will look into the finances tomorrow." She exhaled a breath of relief. She thought she had won. She thought she had shamed me into submission in front of the entire bloodline. She reached over and patted my hand. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. The dinner ended shortly after the dessert plates were cleared. The relatives hugged Victoria in the parking lot, offering empty platitudes and promises to call. I walked to my car alone. The winter air bit at my cheeks. I unlocked my door, but before I could pull the handle, Marcus stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He stood under the harsh amber glow of the street lamp. He wore a tailored wool overcoat, and his expression was unreadable. He glanced back toward the restaurant entrance to make sure Chloe was out of earshot. He stepped close and kept his voice low. "That watch on her wrist is the new reference number," he said. "Released 6 months ago. She did not inherit it. She bought it." I leaned against my car door. "I know," I said. Marcus narrowed his eyes. He analyzed my posture, the lack of surprise in my voice. He looked at my coat pocket where my hand still rested. "You are too quiet, Olivia," he stated. "A girl your age, finding out her stepmother is faking poverty while wearing a luxury watch, should be yelling. You are not yelling. What are you holding on to?" I pulled my hand out of my pocket. I did not show him the key. Not yet. "I need a favor, Marcus," I whispered. "A professional favor. I need you to look at a ledger. But if I show you, you cannot tell Chloe, not until I have all the pieces. Chloe loves too loudly and she forgives too easily. If she knows, she will confront Victoria and the element of surprise dies." Marcus studied my face. He is a man who deals in hard evidence and zero emotion. He understands the mechanics of deception better than anyone I know. He nodded once. "Bring me the numbers," he said. He turned and walked back to his wife. I got into my car and started the engine. The dashboard clock read 10:15. The bank opened at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I had a long night ahead of me. Victoria wanted me to look into the finances. I was about to do exactly that. The dashboard clock shifting from 10:15 to 6 in the morning felt like a single long, drawn-out breath. I did not sleep. I sat at my kitchen island drinking black coffee, watching the sun drag itself over the brick apartment buildings across the street. At 6:30, I called the hospital shift supervisor. I told her I was taking a personal day for family bereavement. She offered her condolences in that hushed professional tone reserved for the grieving. I hung up and put on a tailored navy blazer and dark slacks. When you walk into a financial institution, you dress like someone who expects to be taken seriously. I parked outside the First National branch downtown at 7:50. The air was biting cold. Frost coated the edges of the concrete sidewalk. I waited in my car until the armed security guard unlocked the glass double doors right at 8 o'clock. I walked straight to the reception desk. I handed the teller my driver's license and the cold brass key with the numbers 402 stamped into the bow. The branch manager took over immediately. She led me down a carpeted hallway to the vault area. The heavy steel door stood open, revealing walls lined from floor to ceiling with hundreds of small metal compartments. She matched my key with her master key, turned them simultaneously, and pulled out a long, rectangular steel box. She guided me to a private viewing room, closed the heavy oak door, and left me alone. The room smelled like ozone and old paper. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the overhead fluorescent light. I placed my hands on the cold metal lid. I traced the sharp edges for a second before flipping the dual latches. Inside lay a thick stack of manila folders, a sealed cream envelope, and a black leather-bound ledger. I picked up the envelope first. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting. The blue ink was faded, the strokes uneven and jagged. I could see where the pen had pressed too hard into the paper, leaving physical indentations of his failing motor skills during his final months. I broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of yellow legal paper. Olivia. The greeting stood alone on the first line. I read the next paragraph, and the sterile walls of the bank vault seemed to pull away. I know who Victoria is. I have known for a long time. I know you think I was blind to her spending and her greed, but I was just too sick to fight a war in my own house. The cancer was taking all my energy. I told her I was moving out to the guest house over the garage to recover from severe chronic migraines, and I fabricated out-of-state business trips to cover my hospital stays for chemotherapy. She never even checked on me. If I filed for divorce, she would have dragged it out for years in mediation. She would have demanded half the business. The legal fees would have bled the estate dry. I had to outlast her by dying. So I played the fool. I let her think she was getting away with it, while I built a wall she could never climb. I am leaving you a weapon. Use it without mercy. I set the letter down on the mahogany table. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the heavy wood until my knuckles turned stark white against the dim light of the vault. The sterile walls seemed to close in on me. I squeezed my eyes shut and took a jagged, uneven breath, forcing the tears back down my throat. I allowed myself exactly 10 seconds to mourn the man who died alone in a guest house to protect me. Then I opened my eyes. The grief receded, replaced by the cold precision of a clinical pharmacist reviewing a patient chart. My pulse steadied. I reached into the metal box and pulled out the first manila folder. The label read, "The Trust." Inside was a stack of legal documents printed on heavy stock paper. It was a certificate of trust established 18 months ago. The designation at the top read irrevocable. The wording was clear and final. My father had deposited $1.5 million into it, naming me as the sole beneficiary. The funds were locked, managed by an independent fiduciary firm in Chicago. By making it irrevocable, he ensured that the moment the ink dried, those funds ceased to be his personal property. Victoria could contest his will. She could claim a widow's right to his estate. It would not matter one bit. The money was already gone, insulated by federal law. I picked up the black leather ledger. This was not a standard accounting book. It was a forensic audit. My father had quietly hired a private investigator specializing in financial crimes. The pages documented 5 years of Victoria's hidden activities. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and printed emails filled the plastic sleeves. She had been siphoning money from my father's construction supply business, falsifying vendor invoices and routing the cash into a private offshore account at a Grand Cayman branch of a Swiss banking conglomerate. The dates aligned precisely with the weeks my father claimed to be on out-of-state business trips while he was actually in a clinic, undergoing his most intensive chemotherapy sessions. The current balance in her hidden account was $850,000. She had stolen nearly $1 million from a dying man. She attended his funeral crying into a lace handkerchief while sitting on a fortune. I picked up my father's letter again to read the second page. This was where the blueprint was detailed. Victoria is sloppy when she feels arrogant. She believes I died in staggering debt. I manufactured loan notices and left them in my desk drawer where I knew she would snoop. When I am gone, she will panic about the fake debt and she will try to wipe her own slate clean. She will file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy to protect her stolen cash and shed the credit cards she opened in your name. Let her. Do not stop her. Do not warn her. Let her stand in front of a federal judge and swear under oath that she has 0 assets. Let her commit perjury. Then hand them this box. I folded the letter. I placed it back into the envelope. The brilliance of his plan settled over me like a heavy winter coat. As a clinical pharmacist, I understand how certain medications work. Some drugs do not attack the disease directly. They simply bind to the receptors and wait for the invading cells to destroy themselves. My father had engineered a legal equivalent. If I confronted Victoria at the dinner table last night, it would have been a screaming match. She would have denied everything, packed her bags, and fled to the Cayman Islands with her stolen money. But by letting her file for federal bankruptcy protection, she would have to submit a sworn declaration of her assets to the United States government. Hiding an offshore account during a federal bankruptcy proceeding is not a family dispute. It is a felony punishable by federal prison. My father did not just leave me an inheritance. He left me a guillotine. He built the frame, measured the drop, and handed me the release lever. All I had to do was wait for Victoria to position herself under the blade. I spent the next 2 hours in that private room organizing the documents. I used the bank's secure copier to make duplicates of the offshore account statements, the forensic audit, and the trust verification. I placed the originals back into the metal box, locked it, and slid it into the vault. I kept the copies in a leather briefcase I brought with me. When I walked out of the bank at 10:30, the winter sun was bright. The air tasted different, less like grief and more like gasoline waiting for a spark. Victoria wanted me to take responsibility for the family finances. I was going to do exactly that. I unlocked my car door and tossed the briefcase onto the passenger seat. I needed to call Marcus. I needed him to review the offshore routing numbers and verify the money trail before we made our next move. But before I could turn the key in the ignition, my cell phone started ringing. The caller ID showed the main switchboard number from my hospital. I answered, assuming it was the shift supervisor calling to verify my coverage for tomorrow. It was not the supervisor. It was the hospital human resources director. Her voice was stiff, formal, and tight with concern. "Olivia, we need you to come into the office as soon as possible," she said. "We just received 3 hostile phone calls from aggressive collections agencies. They bypassed the front desk and transferred directly to the pharmacy department, demanding to speak with you about delinquent cash loans. They are aggressively tying up our emergency lines and threatening to file a character complaint with the state pharmacy board." I gripped the steering wheel. The leather creaked under my fingers. Victoria was not just letting me handle her credit card bills. She had actively used my social security number to open cash loans. She was taking out personal loans in my name to funnel even more money into her offshore account before she filed her fake bankruptcy. In my profession, severe financial distress flags you as a risk for narcotic diversion. A board investigation could suspend my license. This was no longer just about my father's money. It was about my career, my livelihood, and my freedom. The timeline had just accelerated. The drive back to the hospital took 12 minutes. I parked in the employee structure and walked straight to the Human Resources Department. The administrative wing always smells like industrial floor cleaner and stale coffee. Brenda, the HR director, did not offer me a chair. She stood behind her mahogany desk. She tacked the end of a gold pen against a stack of pink message slips. 3 calls, Olivia," she said, "before 9 in the morning. They bypassed the switchboard and harassed the pharmacy staff." I looked at the slips. The names of predatory collection agencies were printed in harsh block letters. Brenda folded her arms. "You dispense highly regulated narcotics," she continued. "A pharmacist in severe financial distress being hunted by aggressive creditors is a massive liability. The state board monitors us strictly for drug diversion risks. We cannot have debt collectors compromising a clinical environment. If they disrupt our main line again, I have to suspend you pending a formal investigation." I kept my posture rigid. I did not explain family drama to a corporate administrator. I told her my identity had been compromised and I was working with a forensic investigator. I asked for 48 hours to produce formal documentation of the theft. Brenda slid the pink slips across the desk. 48 hours, she said, or I pull your badge. I took my lunch break in my car. The engine was off. The winter air seeped through the glass. I dialed the first number on the pink slips. I used my clinical voice, the same flat, authoritative tone I used to correct prescribing errors from arrogant surgeons. I provided my social security number. The agent on the line sounded bored. He read the file details. A $12,000 personal cash loan opened 4 months ago. The funds were wired directly to a local checking account, a joint account shared by my father and Victoria. I hung up and dialed the second agency, an $8,000 loan. I dialed the third, $15,000. I wrote the numbers on a yellow legal pad resting on my steering wheel. $35,000 in unsecured cash debt. Victoria did not just steal a credit card to buy shoes. She had weaponized my social security number to extract raw cash. She was pulling liquidity out of thin air and dumping it into her own pockets. My shift ended at 7. The sky was the color of bruised iron. I drove to the suburbs where my sister Chloe and her husband Marcus lived. Their house was a brick colonial with a basketball hoop in the driveway. Chloe opened the front door wearing an apron dusted with flour. She hugged me tight, squeezing the breath out of my lungs. She smelled like vanilla extract and ignorant peace. "I am baking to keep my mind off Dad," she said, gesturing toward the kitchen. Marcus stepped out of the hallway. He wore gray sweatpants and a faded college hoodie. He took one look at my face and stopped walking. Marcus analyzes corporate tax evasion schemes for a living. He reads body language the way he reads balance sheets. He told Chloe he needed to show me a problem with the basement water heater. Chloe waved us off and turned back to her mixing bowl, oblivious to the storm entering her house. We did not go to the basement. We walked into his home office and he locked the solid oak door. The room was lined with accounting textbooks and framed professional certifications. I unzipped my leather briefcase. I laid the copies from the bank vault on his glass desk, the offshore account statements, the forensic trace my father had commissioned. Then I placed the 3 pink message slips and my yellow legal pad right next to them. Marcus turned on his brass desk lamp. The bulb cast a harsh white circle over the paper. He pulled a silver pen from his pocket. He did not ask questions. He went to work. He traced the dates of the personal loans. He ran the pen down the columns of the domestic bank statements. Then he cross-referenced those dates with the deposit records on the Cayman Islands offshore account. I stood by the window, watching the muscle in his jaw flex. He pulled up a blank spreadsheet on his dual monitors. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a rapid, rhythmic clatter. He tracked SWIFT codes, routing numbers, and wire transfer timestamps. 20 minutes passed. The only sound in the room was the clicking of keys and the rustle of paper. Marcus stopped typing. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He pointed the silver pen at the monitor. "The timestamps align," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She took out cash loans in your name. She deposited the funds into the domestic joint account to mingle them with your father's legitimate business revenue. 3 days later, she wired the exact same amounts to the Cayman account. She is structuring the transfers to stay under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold." He looked at me. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen. "This is money laundering and fraud," he said. "This is a federal crime." I leaned against the edge of the desk. The glass was cold through my slacks. I told him about the HR meeting. I told him I needed a formal audit report, a document so undeniable that the hospital board would clear my name immediately. Marcus nodded. "I can build the formal report by tomorrow night," he said. "But we have to tell Chloe. She is my wife. I cannot hide a federal crime from her." I shook my head. "Not yet. Chloe feels everything too loudly. If Victoria stops by and sees Chloe acting distant or angry, Victoria will know the trap is sprung. She will panic. She will flee the jurisdiction with the offshore money before she ever files the bankruptcy paperwork. We need her to file that paperwork. We need her to commit perjury under oath." Marcus stared at the locked door. Keeping a secret of this magnitude from his wife went against his core nature. But he understood the mechanics of the snare my father had designed. He understood that alerting the target ruins the execution. A knock on the wood made us both freeze. Chloe's voice drifted through the door. "Are you guys done down there? The cookies are ready." Marcus swept the vault documents and the pink slips into his top drawer. He pushed it shut with his hip. "We're coming," he called out. He looked back at me. "You have your 48 hours, he whispered. "I will give you the weapon you need for the hospital. But Victoria is escalating. I saw a notification on your father's domestic statement. She retained a bankruptcy attorney this morning." The notification arrived on a Tuesday at noon. Marcus sent a single link to my secure messaging app. No accompanying text, just a URL pointing to Facebook. I stepped out of the sterile pharmacy environment, took off my white coat, and walked to my car in the employee parking structure. I locked the doors and pressed play. Victoria sat on the edge of the floral couch in my father's living room. She had staged the frame perfectly. The background was devoid of any expensive art or electronics. She wore a faded beige turtleneck, her hair pulled back into a messy knot. The lighting was dim, casting long, tired shadows across her face. The video ran for 10 minutes and 40 seconds. It was a masterclass in manufactured grief. She looked directly into the camera lens and took a trembling breath. She told her 400 friends and our entire extended family that she was filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. She claimed my father had hidden a mountain of business debt from her. She painted a picture of a desperate widow fielding calls from ruthless creditors, opening final notices at the kitchen table, and deciding whether to pay for electricity or groceries. Then she shifted the focus. She did not use my name. She did not have to. She looked down at her hands and whispered that the hardest part was facing this ruin alone. She said children sometimes forget the sacrifices parents make and turn their backs when the money dries up. She wiped the corner of her dry eye with her sleeve. She thanked her church group for bringing her canned goods. I scrolled down. The comment section moved faster than I could read. 200 comments in 3 hours. Thoughts and prayers. How can a daughter be so selfish? We are setting up a fund for you, Victoria. My phone vibrated in my palm. Incoming call from Aunt Sarah, my father's oldest sister. A woman who bakes pies for the church bake sale and judges everyone from the front pew. I accepted the call. Olivia, what is wrong with you? She did not say hello. Her voice was sharp, tight with righteous indignation. I just watched Victoria's video. That poor woman is losing the house your father built, and you are sitting in your apartment collecting a pharmacist's salary. You have a moral obligation to help her. I watched a seagull land on the hood of my car. I kept my voice flat, clinical. She filed for bankruptcy, Aunt Sarah. That is a legal process. She filed because you abandoned her. Aunt Sarah's breath hissed through the speaker. She raised you. She took care of your father. And now she is eating out of tin cans because you refused to pay off a few credit cards. It is unnatural, Olivia. You are a cold girl. Your father would be ashamed. I did not defend myself. I did not mention the offshore accounts or the identity theft. Explaining the truth to someone committed to a lie is a waste of oxygen. I told Aunt Sarah I had to return to my shift and ended the call. I went back into the hospital, washed my hands, and spent the next 6 hours dispensing precise doses of cardiac medication. I compartmentalized the family noise, the surface conflict, the rumors, the angry texts from cousins. These were just distractions. They were the smoke meant to hide the fire. Victoria wanted me fighting a public relations war on Facebook. She wanted me defending my reputation in the family group chat. I let her have the applause. I was building a cage. On Thursday morning, I drove to the financial district. Mr. Sterling, the attorney managing my father's trust, operated out of a corner office on the 12th floor of a glass building. He was a man in his 60s who spoke in measured paragraphs and owned a collection of very expensive fountain pens. I placed my leather briefcase on his polished walnut desk. I pulled out the copies Marcus had audited, the offshore Cayman Islands statements, the 3 personal loan applications bearing my forged signature and my social security number, the domestic bank ledgers tracking the exact routing of the stolen funds. Sterling put on his reading glasses. He spent 20 minutes reviewing the spread of documents. The room was silent except for the sound of crisp paper turning. He picked up his pen, tapped it once against his legal pad, and looked up. Your brother-in-law builds a formidable forensic trail, he said. The SWIFT codes align perfectly with the withdrawal dates. Is it enough? I asked. Sterling back in his leather chair. Victoria formally filed her Chapter 7 petition in federal court yesterday afternoon. When a debtor files for Chapter 7, they must submit a schedule of assets and liabilities. They must sign a declaration under penalty of perjury stating that the schedule is true and accurate. He tapped the Cayman Islands statement. She did not list this offshore account. She did not list the $850,000. She swore the United States government that she is destitute. He opened a fresh manila envelope. We are going to submit this entire packet directly to the federal bankruptcy trustee assigned to her case. The trustee is a government official whose sole job is to liquidate assets and uncover hidden wealth. We will file a formal adversary proceeding objecting to the discharge of her debts based on fraud. We will also include the evidence of identity theft regarding your personal loans. Victoria thought she was outsmarting a grieving 28-year-old girl. She did not realize she was inviting a federal investigator to perform an autopsy on her finances. I signed the authorization forms. Sterling placed the audited documents into the envelope and sealed it. He told me the trustee would review the file over the weekend. The legal machinery was now in motion. It would move slowly at first, then with the crushing weight of a freight train. I left the office tower and walked down the avenue. The winter sun reflected off the glass storefronts. I needed coffee. I crossed the street toward a high-end espresso bar located next to a luxury day spa. I pulled the heavy glass door open and stopped. Through the interior window separating the cafe from the spa, I saw her. Victoria. She was not wearing the faded beige turtleneck from her Facebook video. She wore a tailored wool coat draped over the back of a plush leather chair. She was sitting at a marble manicure station. A technician was painting her nails a deep crimson. Victoria held a glass of champagne in her free hand. She threw her head back and laughed at something the technician said. The diamond Rolex caught the overhead lighting and threw bright sparks across the wall. This was the grieving widow. This was the woman eating out of tin cans. She had just committed federal perjury to wipe away $80,000 of stolen debt. She believed her offshore money was invisible. She believed she had successfully shamed me into silence and secured her future. She looked relaxed, invincible, untouchable. I stood in the coffee shop watching her sip her champagne. I did not take a photo. I did not confront her. I did not tap on the glass and demand an explanation. I turned around and walked out into the cold air. The knife was sharp. The trap was set. Victoria was busy celebrating her victory while the federal government was opening a manila envelope with her name on it. I just had to wait for the meeting of creditors. I had to wait for her to sit in a federal courtroom and lie one final time. The sky over the city was the color of bruised iron when I picked Marcus up. He stood in his driveway holding a thick leather briefcase. We drove downtown in near silence. The heater in my car hummed, but the chill in my bones had nothing to do with the weather. Today was the 341 meeting of creditors. It is the crucible of the American bankruptcy system. It is the single moment where a debtor must sit in a room, look at a federal official in the eye, and swear under the threat of federal prison that they are truly broke. We parked in the municipal garage and walked 3 blocks to the federal courthouse. The building was an imposing slab of gray concrete and tinted glass. We passed through the metal detectors, placing our coats and shoes into gray plastic bins. Marcus handled his briefcase with measured care. Inside that leather shell was the forensic audit, the offshore bank statements, and the copies of my forged loan applications. It was a loaded weapon wrapped in paper. We took the elevator to the 4th floor. The meeting room was not the grand mahogany courtroom you see on television. It was a sterile, windowless conference room. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, casting a harsh white glare. A long folding table dominated the center of the room. A digital audio recorder sat dead center, its red standby light pulsing. The bankruptcy trustee sat at the head of the table, surrounded by stacks of manila folders. Marcus and I took our seats in the back row. The plastic chairs were hard and unforgiving. About a dozen other people sat in the room. They were exhausted citizens clutching their final notices. Single mothers dealing with medical debt. Older men crushed by predatory loans. They stared at the floor. They spoke in hushed, embarrassed whispers. At exactly 8:50, Victoria walked through the double doors. She had curated her appearance with surgical precision. The diamond Rolex was gone. The designer coat was nowhere to be seen. She wore a pair of faded black trousers and a shapeless gray sweater that looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of a donation bin. Her hair was gathered into a severe, messy knot. She had skipped her usual makeup, leaving her skin pale and tired. She walked with a slight stoop, playing the role of a woman carrying the crushing weight of the world on her shoulders. Beside her walked her attorney, a man named Mr. Gable. He wore a cheap blue suit with a frayed collar. He carried a cracked briefcase and checked his phone every 10 seconds. He was a high-volume bankruptcy attorney who churned through cases for a flat fee. He believed his client was just another unfortunate widow. He had no idea he was sitting next to an offshore millionaire. Victoria took a seat in the second row. She opened her purse to pull out a tissue. As she raised her head, her eyes swept across the room and locked onto me. She froze. Her hand stopped midway to her face. For 3 seconds, the mask slipped. I saw the cold, arrogant calculation behind her eyes. Then, her lips curved into a very faint, mocking smile. She turned away, quickly dabbing at her dry eyes for the benefit of the room. She thought she understood why I was there. The collection agencies had been hounding my hospital. She assumed I was broken. She believed I had come to beg her to plead with her attorney to withdraw the fraudulent loans from her filing before my pharmacy license was suspended. She thought she had won. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I did not react. Marcus sat next to me, still as a statue, his eyes analyzing every micro-movement Victoria made. The trustee cleared his throat and hit the record button on the digital device. The red light shifted from a pulse to a solid glow. The federal record was now live. Every syllable spoken in this room was subject to the perjury statutes of the United States government. He called 3 cases before hers. We sat and listened to real tragedy. We listened to a mechanic who lost his shop due to a spinal injury. We listened to a teacher buried in debt from her husband's gambling addiction. They answered the questions with shaking voices and genuine tears. The raw honesty in the room made Victoria's fake tragedy feel even more grotesque. Then the trustee looked at his docket. "Victoria Townsend," he called out, his voice echoing off the bare walls. Victoria stood. She let out a soft, practiced sigh and walked to the table. She sat in the heavy wooden chair facing the trustee. Mr. Gable sat beside her, opening his thin file. "Please state your name for the record and raise your right hand," the trustee said. "Victoria Townsend," she whispered. She raised her hand. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?" "I do." The trustee flipped open her Chapter 7 petition. "Mrs. Townsend, I have reviewed your schedules. You are seeking to discharge $80,000 in unsecured debt encompassing credit cards and personal cash loans. You list your total assets as $1,200 in a checking account and a 10-year-old sedan. Is this a complete and accurate representation of your financial situation?" Victoria pressed the tissue to her nose. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice trembling perfectly. "My husband David passed away recently. He handled all of our accounts. I had no idea he was taking out these loans to cover his failing business. I have tried to make the payments, but I am out of money. I am relying on food donations from my church." She was blaming my dead father for her own luxury debts. She was playing the victim over the corpse of the man she robbed. Marcus shifted beside me. I heard his leather shoes squeak against the floor. I placed a hand on his arm to keep him steady. The trustee nodded sympathetically. He was required to ask a specific sequence of questions mandated by the Department of Justice to root out bankruptcy fraud. He began down the list. "Have you transferred any property or cash exceeding $1,000 to anyone within the past 2 years?" "No, sir," she lied. "Have you sold any real estate or vehicles recently?" "No, sir," she lied again. "Do you have any claims against an estate, or are you the beneficiary of any trust?" "No, sir." The trustee looked over his glasses. "Mrs. Townsend, do you own any offshore accounts, foreign investments, or hidden cash assets that are not declared in this filing?" Victoria looked at the trustee with wide, innocent eyes. She shook her head. "No, sir. My husband left me in ruin. I do not have a single hidden cent anywhere in the world. I own nothing but the clothes on my back." The room was silent, save for the hum of the ventilation system. The lie hung in the air, captured forever on the digital audio file. A federal crime executed with a flawless, sorrowful expression. Mr. Gable checked his watch again. The trustee organized his papers into a neat stack. The performance had worked. The government official saw no red flags in the tragic story of the destitute widow. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a heavy silver pen. He moved his hand toward the final page of the meeting document, preparing to sign the recommendation that would formally discharge her debts and close the inquiry. One stroke of ink and Victoria would walk out of this building free. I looked at Marcus. He unlatched the brass locks on his briefcase. I stood up. The metal legs of my chair scraped against the hard linoleum floor. The sound cracked through the quiet room like a gunshot. "Sir, I have physical evidence showing this woman just committed perjury in a federal court." My voice was even. It carried across the sterile conference room, cutting straight through the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. The federal trustee stopped mid-motion. His heavy silver pen hovered an inch above the final signature line on Victoria's discharge paperwork. He looked up, peering over the rim of his glasses. The exhaustion in his eyes vanished, replaced instantly by the sharp, calculated focus of a government official who had just heard the word perjury on an active audio record. I stepped out from the back row. I did not run. I did not carry any anger in my posture. I carried a blue 2-inch binder. The linoleum floor squeaked under my shoes as I walked the 20 feet to the center table. Victoria turned her head. Her fake tears stopped falling. The performance she had perfected over the last 3 weeks halted the moment she recognized the binder in my hands. Her mouth opened, but her vocal cords failed to produce a sound. I stopped at the edge of the table directly across from the trustee. I did not look at my stepmother. I kept my eyes locked on the government official. "State your name for the record," the trustee commanded. He pressed a button on the digital recorder to ensure the audio input was maximized. "Olivia Townsend," I replied. "I am the stepdaughter of the debtor. I am also a victim of identity theft perpetrated by her." Mr. Gable, the cheap bankruptcy attorney Victoria had hired, jumped in. "Sir, this is a highly irregular disruption. My client is a grieving widow dealing with a hostile family situation. We request that this individual be removed from the proceeding so we can finalize the discharge." The trustee held up his left hand. The gesture was small, but carried the full weight of the Department of Justice. "In a 3-4-1 meeting, the trustee dictates the rules. Miss Townsend," he said, keeping his gaze on me, "you made an allegation of perjury. That is a felony offense. Do you have documentation to support this claim? Right now?" "I have the receipts," I said. I unclasped the blue binder. The heavy cover fell open. I pulled out the first stack of papers and slid them across the smooth surface of the folding table. They came to a rest right on top of Victoria's fraudulent Chapter 7 petition. This is a certified statement from a private offshore account located in the Cayman Islands, I stated, maintaining my clinical tone. The account is registered under the name Victoria Townsend. You will see the current balance listed on the second page is $850,000. The most recent deposit was made 12 days before she filed for bankruptcy protection in this court. The room lost all its air. The other debtors, waiting in the back rows, sat paralyzed. Marcus watched from his seat, his posture rigid, his eyes tracking every micro-expression at the table. Victoria turned the color of ash. Her skin went pale with a sickly gray undertone. Her hands, which had been resting softly in her lap to project helplessness, shot up to grip the edge of the wooden table, her knuckles stretched tight. She stared at the Cayman Islands logo printed on the top corner of the page. She knew those numbers. She knew that routing code. The trustee picked up the document. He adjusted his glasses. He read the account holder name, the balance, and the timestamps. He did not say a word. He just placed the paper down and looked at me, waiting for the rest. I pulled the second stack from the binder. This is a forensic audit tracing 5 years of unauthorized withdrawals from my late father's construction supply business. The audit was conducted by an independent financial investigator and verified by a corporate forensic accountant. It maps the exact dates funds were embezzled from the domestic business accounts and wired directly into that offshore holding. She did not lose my father's money. She stole it. Mr. Gable leaned forward, squinting at the spreadsheet. He looked at the SWIFT codes highlighted in yellow. He looked at the dates. He looked at his client. Lawyers who handle high-volume bankruptcy cases deal with desperate people hiding cash under mattresses or transferring an old car to a cousin. They do not deal with international money laundering and nearly $1 million in hidden offshore assets. Gable realized exactly what he was sitting next to. His self-preservation instincts kicked in with brutal efficiency. He physically recoiled. He pushed his plastic chair back, scraping it against the floor, putting a visible gap between himself and Victoria. He closed his own thin file folder and crossed his arms, signaling to the federal officer that he had zero prior knowledge of these documents. Victoria noticed her lawyer retreating. Her head snapped toward him. Her lips trembled. "Mr. Gable," she whispered, her voice a thin, ragged rasp. "Do something. Tell him she is lying." Gable did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the wall behind the trustee. "I advise you to invoke your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, Mrs. Townsend," he muttered. "I was not finished." I pulled the final set of papers from the binder, the 3 pink message slips from the collection agencies attached to the forged loan applications. I slid them across the table, lining them up next to the offshore statements. 2 weeks after my father's funeral, this woman used my Social Security number to open 3 personal cash loans totaling $35,000, I said. The funds were deposited into a domestic joint account and structured into smaller wire transfers sent to the Cayman account. She generated the exact debt she's attempting to discharge today by committing identity theft against me. The trustee picked up the loan applications. He compared the forged signatures to the signature Victoria had just provided under oath on her bankruptcy petition. The looping letters, the distinct slant, it was undeniable. The silence in the room was deafening. It was the heavy, crushing silence of a trap snapping shut. The illusion Victoria had spent weeks crafting, the fake tears, the donation bin sweater, the Facebook pity posts, all of it, was crushed under the weight of objective, irrefutable data. She had walked into a federal building and lied to the United States government, believing her manipulative charm could override federal law. Victoria stared at the documents. Her chest heaved. The oxygen seemed to evade her lungs. The crumpled tissue she had been using to dab her fake tears was now crushed in her right hand, shaking violently against the edge of the table. Her eyes darted wildly around the sterile conference room, scanning the heavy double doors, the blank walls, the impassive face of the federal trustee. She looked like a cornered animal, desperately searching for an exit that did not exist. She looked up at me. There was no anger left in her eyes. The arrogance was gone. All that remained was the hollow, frantic terror of a predator, realizing it had stepped onto a landmine. "You," she gasped, her voice a thin, ragged whisper. "You set me up." "I did not set you up, Victoria," I replied, my voice unwavering. "You filled out the paperwork. You signed the declaration. You swore the oath. I just brought the paperwork to the right desk." The trustee reached for the digital audio recorder. He pressed the red button, stopping the recording. The red light faded to black. He took the heavy silver pen he had almost used to grant her a financial clean slate, placed the cap back on, and slid it into his shirt pocket. "Mrs. Townsend," the trustee said. His voice was no longer sympathetic. It was the cold, mechanical voice of the justice system. "This 341 meeting is suspended indefinitely. Your petition for Chapter 7 discharge is halted. I am impounding these documents and referring this entire file to the United States Trustee Program's Criminal Division and the Federal Bureau of Investigation for suspected bankruptcy fraud, perjury, and identity theft." He looked at Mr. Gable. "Counsel, I suggest you secure criminal representation for your client immediately." Gable nodded once a sharp, jerky motion. "Understood, sir." Victoria sat frozen in her hard plastic chair. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking uncontrollably, a fine, rapid tremor that she could not hide. The woman who had kicked me out of my childhood home, the woman who had charged luxury spa treatments to my name while planning my financial ruin, was now a suspect in a federal criminal investigation. I reached forward and closed my empty blue binder. The satisfying click of the metal rings echoed in the quiet room. I picked it up, turned my back to the table, and walked toward the heavy double doors. Marcus was already standing, waiting for me. He offered a single approving nod. We walked out of the sterile conference room, leaving Victoria trapped in the cage she had built with her own 2 hands. The federal government operates at 2 distinct speeds, glacial and instantaneous. When the bankruptcy trustee suspended the hearing and packed those forged loan applications into his briefcase, the instantaneous gears engaged. The machinery of justice did not care about family dynamics or grieving widows, and only cared about numbers and perjury. Within 48 hours, a federal judge signed a freeze order on every domestic bank account tied to Victoria Townsend. The offshore funds in the Cayman Islands were flagged for international review. She could not buy a cup of coffee without triggering a federal alert. The downfall did not remain confined to the sterile walls of the courthouse. The exposure spilled out onto the front page of the local newspaper by Thursday morning. A reporter for the City Chronicle noticed 2 dark sedans parked on the lawn of my childhood home. He photographed federal agents walking out of the front door, carrying cardboard banker's boxes filled with financial records, laptops, and ledgers. The headline printed the next day did not use the word stepmother. It used the words wire fraud and identity theft. When the ink hit the paper, the digital world went dead. The family group chat had been a constant source of noise for weeks. It was the arena where my aunts and uncles performed their righteous indignation. Aunt Sarah had posted daily scripture verses about honoring thy parents. Uncle David had sent long paragraphs about my ungrateful generation. They had built a monument to Victoria's suffering and crowned me the villain. On Thursday afternoon, I opened the messaging app on my phone. Someone had posted a link to the newspaper article. No text accompanied the link, just the URL. I watched the read receipts appear at the bottom of the screen. Tiny circular photos of my relatives popping up one by one as they opened the chat and read the headline. Aunt Sarah read it. Uncle David read it. 3 different cousins read it. Nobody typed a single word. The typing indicator never appeared. The righteous anger evaporated, replaced by the suffocating silence of people realizing they had publicly backed a criminal. They had crucified the victim and handed the nails to the predator. I did not send the message. I let their silence hang there, a heavy, undeniable weight. The quiet broke at 2 a.m. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. The caller ID glowed in the dark bedroom, showing my sister's name. I sat up and answered. Chloe did not say hello. The sound coming through the speaker was raw, uneven weeping. It was the sound of a worldview fracturing into jagged pieces. She gasped for air, trying to form words, but failing. "Breathe, Chloe," I said, keeping my tone level. "I'm so sorry," she choked out the syllables, scraping against her throat. "I believed her, Olivia. She sat in my kitchen and cried about Dad, and I gave her money. I actually wrote her a check for groceries while she was stealing your identity." "You did not know," I replied. "I should have listened to you." She was sobbing now, a deep, rhythmic grief. "She used Dad's memory to rob you. I feel so stupid." The phone fumbled. I heard the rustle of fabric and a sharp intake of breath before a different voice came on the line. "Olivia." It was Marcus. His voice was a thick, solid anchor in the middle of a storm. "I am here, Marcus," I said. "She is going to be okay," he stated. "I am making her drink some water. I need to update you on the logistics." "Tell me." Marcus shifted into his professional cadence, the forensic auditor taking control of the chaos. The FBI raid rattled Victoria. When criminals panic, they try to liquidate whatever they can reach. I took Chloe to the bank yesterday afternoon. We closed every joint account she shared with your father in Victoria. We locked her social security number with the credit bureaus. I initiated a hard freeze on all our household assets. Victoria cannot pull a single dollar from this branch of the family. "You built the wall," I said. "Steel and concrete," Marcus replied. "Your trap worked." The federal trustee issued the referral right after you left the room. "Victoria is cornered and she knows it. Watch her back. Desperate people do irrational things when the exits close." He hung up. I set the phone down and watched the digital clock flip to 2:15. The family had imploded. The lines were drawn and the loyalties were permanently severed. I lay back against the pillows. I did not feel victorious. I just felt clear. Marcus's warning proved accurate 3 days later. My shift at the hospital ended at 7 in the evening. The winter sun had already set, leaving the employee parking structure bathed in the sickly yellow glow of sodium vapor lights. The air was frigid, biting through my wool coat as I walked toward my car on the third level. The concrete echoed with the sound of my boots. I unlocked my car from 20 feet away. The headlights flashed. A shadow detached itself from the concrete pillar next to my driver's side door. Victoria stepped into the amber light. The victim mask was gone. The soft weeping widow had been erased. Her hair hung in greasy strands around her face. Her skin was sallow, the makeup smeared beneath her eyes. She wore a thin jacket, pulled tight across her chest, shivering in the biting wind. She looked feral. She looked like an animal caught in a snare, chewing off its own leg to escape. "You," she hissed. I stopped walking. I kept 10 feet of distance between us. I did not reach for my pepper spray. I simply stood under the overhead light and looked at her. "You ruined my life!" she screamed, the sound bouncing off the concrete ceiling. "They took my passports. They froze my accounts. My lawyer dropped me." "You lied to a federal judge, Victoria," I said, my voice carrying no emotion. "I just provided the reading material." She lunged forward, closing half the distance. "I lost the house. I lost the money. You set me up. You knew about the trust, and you let me sit there and beg for pennies. You are a sociopath. You are exactly like your father, cold and heartless." She spat the words, her chest heaving. The sheer entitlement radiating from her was staggering. She had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars, forged my signature, risked my pharmacy license, and she still believed she was the wrong party. I took 2 steps forward, walked right past her, and opened my car door. "Do not turn your back on me!" she shrieked. I slid into the driver's seat and pulled the door shut. Before I could turn the ignition, she slammed her body against the vehicle. Her hands hit the driver's side window with a heavy thud. She pressed her face against the cold glass. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated with raw, unhinged fury. She pounded her fist against the reinforced window. "Open the door! You are going to fix this! You are going to call the trustee and tell them the loans were a mistake!" I looked at her through the glass. I did not flinch. I did not reach for the window switch. I watched her spit fly against the exterior pane. I watched the veins bulge in her neck. I watched a woman who had spent years manipulating everyone around her realize that she possessed zero leverage. I maintained eye contact. I raised my left hand, placed my index finger on the door panel, and pressed the central locking button. A sharp, dry click echoed inside the cabin. The sound translated perfectly through the glass. It was the sound of a boundary sealing shut. It was the sound of finality. Victoria froze. Her fists stopped pounding. She stared at me, recognizing the cold, mechanical rejection. I shifted the car into drive. I did not rev the engine. I let my foot off the brake. The vehicle rolled forward, forcing her to step back or be knocked down. She stumbled away from the tires, hugging her thin jacket around her shoulders. I drove down the concrete ramp, leaving her standing alone in the yellow light, surrounded by the echoing silence of the parking structure. I merged onto the main avenue, heading toward my apartment. I had my career. I had my freedom. And Victoria had an upcoming appointment with the United States Department of Justice. 7 months after the federal agents carried cardboard banker's boxes out of my childhood home, I walked into the United States courthouse for the final time. The sentencing hearing took less than an hour. The judge sat behind a raised mahogany bench, flipping through the thick prosecution file. Victoria stood at the defense table. She did not wear a faded beige turtleneck or a staged donation bin sweater today. She wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. The fabric looked stiff and cheap under the harsh fluorescent lights. A heavy steel chain wrapped around her waist, connecting to the handcuffs securing her wrists. The woman who once flashed a new diamond Rolex at a luxury steakhouse now kept her bare, trembling hands locked together over her stomach. Her hair hung in dull gray strands. The judge did not look at her with sympathy. He read the charges aloud for the official record. Wire fraud, identity theft, perjury under oath in a federal bankruptcy proceeding. He struck his wooden gavel against the sound block. 7 years in a federal correctional institution. Full restitution of the stolen funds. Victoria turned her head toward the gallery. The wooden benches behind her were empty. Aunt Sarah did not show up. The cousins who sent me angry text messages did not come to support her. I sat alone in the back row. Our eyes met. She searched my face for a reaction, a smirk, a sign of victory. I gave her nothing. I just held her gaze until the bailiff gripped her elbow and guided her through a side door. The heavy oak clicked shut. That was the last time I saw my stepmother. The fallout severed our bloodline into distinct isolated camps. The grand family group chat was deleted. The relatives who had blindly championed Victoria in her victim narrative faded into the background. They did not call to apologize. Pride rarely allows people to admit they handed the nails to the predator while crucifying the target. I did not chase them down for validation. I did not mail holiday cards to aunts and uncles who demanded I sacrifice my career to fund a criminal. The silence they left behind was not an empty void. It was a clean, sterilized space. The rot had been excised from the family tree, leaving only the branches strong enough to bear weight. I spend my Friday evenings at Chloe and Marcus' house now. Last night, I sat at their kitchen island while Marcus pulled a cast iron skillet from the oven. The scent of roasted chicken and fresh rosemary filled the room. Chloe poured red wine into 3 crystal goblets. We did not discuss federal indictments. We did not talk about offshore bank accounts or the Cayman Islands. Chloe complained about a micromanaging coworker at her office. Marcus told a dry joke about a corporate tax audit he ran that week. I traced the rim of my wine glass and listened to my sister laugh. A real unrestrained laugh that reached her eyes. The tension that used to choke the air whenever Victoria entered a room was gone. We had survived the parasite. We lost half our relatives, but the 3 people sitting in this kitchen formed an unbreakable perimeter. My professional crisis dissolved the day the federal indictment was unsealed. I handed the official court records to the hospital human resources director. Brenda reviewed the documents, removed the probationary flag from my file, and officially closed the internal inquiry. I spent the next 4 months working with the major credit bureaus in a fraud resolution specialist. The fraudulent cash loans were stricken from my record, the derogatory marks vanished, my credit score climbed steadily back to its original tier. The financial ghost Victoria tried to attach to my name evaporated. With the criminal proceedings concluded, Mr. Sterling executed the initial provisions of my father's irrevocable trust. The fiduciary firm processed the first major distribution. I did not buy a luxury watch. I did not book a vacation. I spent my weekends touring real estate listings. On a crisp Saturday morning, I parked my car on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees. I walked up the paved walkway of a single-story craftsman house. Dark blue siding, white trim, a wide front porch overlooking a manicured lawn. I pulled a silver key from my coat pocket. I slid it into the brass deadbolt and turned it. The lock yielded with a sharp metallic snap. I stepped inside. The house was empty, smelling of fresh paint and polished hardwood floors. I bought it with a cash down payment. The deed recorded at the county clerk's office bears only one name, Olivia Townsend. I walked into the kitchen, filled a ceramic mug from the coffee maker I brought over in a cardboard box, and stepped back out onto the front porch. The morning air bit at my cheeks. A neighbor walked a golden retriever down the sidewalk and raised a hand in greeting. I waved back. I sat on the wooden porch swing and took a sip of the dark, bitter roast. I thought about my father. I thought about his final months, his body failing sitting in his home office, watching his wife siphon his life savings. He could have screamed. He could have thrown plates against the wall. Instead, he hired a forensic investigator. He built a paper cage. The trust fund was not the real inheritance my father left me. The true weapon was the lesson he taught me about silence. Manipulators and narcissists rely on noise. They weaponize tears and family guilt, expecting you to match their chaotic energy. but I learned that silence is never surrender. It is the quiet space where you let hard data defeat emotional manipulation. It is the clarity you need to realize that pruning a rotting branch from your family tree is not a betrayal, but an act of survival. They assume your quietness means you are weak. They never realize that your silence is just the sound of an inescapable trap being assembled. While Victoria was buying designer handbags and performing her grief on social media, I was reading bank ledgers. While she was staging a fake memorial dinner to manipulate my sister, I was standing in a vault memorizing a dead man's blueprint. The brass key did not just unlock a metal box, it unlocked a strategy for survival. The blue binder now sits at the bottom of a locked filing cabinet in my guest bedroom. I do not look at it. I do not need to. The world righted itself because I refused to let a thief dictate my reality. I kept my mouth shut. I gathered the receipts, and I let the United States justice system handle the trash. I want to ask you a question. If you found yourself holding that blue binder, standing in the shadows while a toxic relative played the victim to your entire family, what would you do? Would you have the iron discipline to keep your mouth shut and wait for them to walk into a courtroom? Or would you drop the evidence on the table the very first day to clear your name? Patience is a heavy burden to carry when everyone you know is calling you the villain. Let me know your answer in the comments below. Do you strike immediately, or do you build the cage? If you want to hear another story about dismantling a manipulator's fake empire, click the video on your screen right now. Thank you for watching Sweet Life Drama.